if you were a real magician, would you really waste your time making 3 cards, putting 3 cards in somebody's pocket and having them show up in that person's pocket instead? Like, to what end? What did that accomplish? What would that do for the world? If you could do real magic, you wouldn't do that. And so Jay described, he said, imagine that you're on a street corner, and like in a busy city, and the crosswalk sign or whatever it is comes on. You're allowed to walk now, and you start walking. There's somebody who's a few steps ahead of you, and out of nowhere the skies open up and it just starts pouring, just rain, just out of nowhere coming down. And you see this person a few steps ahead of you reach into the air and out of thin air grab an umbrella from nothing and continue walking. And you look around and you go, and you realize you're the only person that saw that. And the person's gone now. You don't even know where they went. And for all you know, you imagined it. But he goes, what would that moment do to you if you saw that? How would that make you feel? He goes, that's the feeling we should be trying to get our audiences to. That feeling. Real magic.
I just can't keep my magic in the can.
Yeah. I like that it's just slowly drifting like the Titanic off to one side. I often feel like that. My facial hair is just pulling me down. I have to fight against it all day.
Some of our mustaches are heavier than others.
That's true. That is, to quote Marty McFly, this is heavy, man. Well, weight's got nothing to do with it.
So, in the spirit of magic, I must change my hat.
Oh, very good. A white hat.
With a Kleenex instead of a
good.
handkerchief. Now I will wave my practice hand. Abracadabra. I've manifested some chips from inside my white hat. Well, Brian Conversational Magic Miller, thank you so much for joining me in full ambiance today. The purple mood is overflowing.
It is. Overbearing, maybe. Yeah.
That too.
Yeah. Especially, it's a nice bright day in Connecticut, and I was like, let me get rid of all of the naturalness for this. Yeah. I'll go into my cave.
The magic cave. Well, you do me that favor, and I thank you for it. Mm. So we are here to focus on magic today. And now that I have graced you with my special brand of ridiculous magic, we can get on topic and do a deep dive. Yeah. Shall I start with your magical history?
Sure.
Okay.
I'd love to hear what I've been up to.
Let's just anchor us a little bit in you, and then we'll go off into the wide world of. Yeah. So in previous conversations that we've had, you told me that your father and grandfather actually initiated you into the realms of the magic. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a huge part of my upbringing. My grandfather loved magic, just practiced it as an amateur, and he, so my father grew up with it because his dad did, and so I grew up with it because my dad did, and
Three generations.
It was a huge part. Yeah, 3 generations of magic lovers. Dad magic. Yeah. There is, just like there's dad rock, there is dad magic, by the way, if you're in the magic circles, as I am reluctantly still. Yeah.
And you are now a magic daddy.
Yeah. I get asked from time to time, are you gonna show Milo magic? Are you gonna teach Milo magic? I'm like, no, I'm gonna keep Milo as far away. If he discovers magic on his own, that's great. But like, I have no interest in foisting that upon him,
Really?
Like if it's not like he's not going to know that I do it. And we live in an age where very different than that. I am the first generation of parents that will have like high def documentation of our lives and careers. Like I don't, I have black and white photos of my dad when he was my age, and super black and white photos of even blacker and whiter photos of, my grandparents. But Milo's going to have a YouTube channel that I made from the time I was 18 to go back and watch everything. He'll know exactly what I did, what I didn't do, what I've exaggerated and what I haven't. He'll see that I'm not exaggerating, these stories. Like, you know how you wonder, like, if your parents really did the things or your grandparents really did the things that they've talked about? Well, the proof is right there. So I think he'll discover magic if he wants to. Yeah.
And he will know how long is your handkerchief.
That's true. He'll know too many, probably too. Well, that's part of the problem. It's part of one of the reasons I don't want to throw magic upon him is actually I want him to at least get the initial experience of loving magic and enjoying it for the wonder of it before discovering the, behind the curtain, all the secrets.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So you want him to discover the power of true magic, pure magic, before the scales fall from his eyes and he becomes jaded and miserable.
Yeah, like I have. Yeah. I'm dead inside. I just smile.
I'm checking if you have a Duchenne smile or not.
I think I do.
Real.
I think my eyes are smiling.
So, Brian, okay, let's fast forward because we won't take too much time on your history. We've talked about it in other conversations. Sure. But I do believe that it was magic that saved you from social outcast status.
Yeah. I mean, in a large way, it was really the catalyst for me finding a personality and discovering, interpersonal skills, being able to talk to people, being able to make people laugh, getting invited to parties, but all contingent on magic, as long as I was willing to be a magic monkey on command, as long as my pockets were stuffed with magic and I was happy to do a trick every time someone asked, then I was very popular. And as soon as I wasn't willing to do that, I was not popular again. But yeah.
Okay, so it was something you had to turn on and off in order to claim that social status.
Yeah, and I was very happy to turn that on for like all of high school after a childhood of being an outcast.
Well, take me forward into your college years where you were studying philosophy. You did tell me in a previous conversation that you were, up to your eyeballs in philosophy and mathematics. But you also were studying magic, and there was a book called Beyond Secrets that helped you to dive a little bit into the theory of magic. What would you say about that?
Yeah, this book Beyond Secrets by Jay Sankey. He's this brilliant Canadian comedy magician. He came out of stand-up comedy and went into magic. He has his academic background in philosophy and psychology, none of which I knew back then when he was my hero. And so what was so interesting is me going on a very similar trajectory and only discovering in retrospect, years and years later, that my hero had gone on the exact same trajectory. So yeah, he's a Toronto-based comedy magician, absolutely off the wall, absurdist. One of his heroes, I think, was Steve Martin. Same thing, right? I mean, just total parallel trajectories. Well, not parallel. I mean, he's 20 years my senior, but
parallel universes.
Yeah, I mean, it was just it's so interesting, and I've met so many magicians since who've taken similar philosophy, psychology, comedy into magic. There's I don't know, there's something about that path that just is magnetic if you have the kind of brain that some of us seem to have, if you have the lens through which you see the world that some of us seem to have, and
the warped brain you're speaking of. Yeah,
that need to it's like a simultaneous need for control, probably because there's so many Revenge of the Bullied, Revenge of the Nerds stories in Magic, right? So that need for control, take back control of social situations. But at the same time, this desire for connectedness, and there's something so, I mean, that's like the fundamental antagonism of Magic, that it's based on deception, but ultimately brings people together when it's done well. And it's just, it's so interesting. That's why so many of us end up in philosophy and psychology, I think, is because that's the way we see the world, is weird things like that.
Yeah. You become proficient in the weird.
Proficient in the weird. Yeah, something like that, for sure.
Well, that's one of my core values.
Yeah, well, no doubt. No doubt.
You knew that already.
Yeah.
So that book, Beyond Secrets, allowed you to, it sounds like, to connect your love of philosophy and maybe a budding appreciation for the absurd into magic and comedy.
Yeah, well, there was something. So this book, Beyond Secrets, because that's what you originally asked about, and then I went off somewhere else. So thanks for bringing us back. Beyond Secrets, it was the first book I'd ever read that was a magic book with no tricks in it, which is why it was called Beyond Secrets. Every magic book I had ever read was a book where it described a trick and then it taught you how to do it, and then it described a trick and taught you how to do it. That's what magic books were. And so I learned all the tricks from books. This is pre-YouTube and everything else. And so when I got my hands on this book, Beyond Secrets, and I started reading it, I realized, oh my God, there's no tricks in here. I only bought it because my hero wrote it, and assumed it would be like every other project he'd ever released. It would have tricks, and but it didn't. It was short essays, mini essays. It was like, I think there were 100+ mini essays. They were a page long, 3 pages long at most. Short book, 120 pages or something. Very, very small book. Stick in your back pocket. And every essay was just a different thought that Jay had about being a magician as opposed to doing magic tricks. And I remember a couple of specific essays in there, and one of them was the question, if you could do real magic, what would it look like? Like, what would you do if you were a real magician? And it was so weird because I had never thought about that. Because when you learn magic as a kid, it's trick focused, right? You get a magic kit that has tricks, and the first thing you get interested in is the mechanics as a kid, right? You're like, oh my God, how does this box work? Where when I push it in and when the quarter disappears when I pull it out, you're trying to figure out the mechanics, and that's what you get excited about, is the mechanism of magic. How do trapdoors work? And this is the engineering brain, and then that's where most magicians stay. They stay in the mechanics, and you can see it in many amateur and magicians' performances, many weekend warriors who are trick monkeys. They're just, which they're really, really good at the stuff, but there's no substance behind it. There's no connectedness. There's no story. And for me, this was the first, maybe not the first time I had ever encountered that there was more to magic than tricks, but it was the first time I took it seriously, was this book. And the question, if you were a real magician, would you really waste your time making 3 cards, putting 3 cards in somebody's pocket and having them show up in that person's pocket instead? Like, to what end? What did that accomplish? What would that do for the world? If you could do real magic, you wouldn't do that. And so Jay described, he said, imagine that you're on a street corner, and like in a busy city, and the crosswalk sign or whatever it is comes on. You're allowed to walk now, and you start walking. There's somebody who's a few steps ahead of you, and out of nowhere, the skies open up and it just starts pouring, just rain, just out of nowhere coming down. And you see this person a few steps ahead of you reach into the air, and out of thin air, grab an umbrella from nothing and continue walking. And you look around and you go, and you realize you're the only person that saw that. And the person's gone now. You don't even know where they went. And for all you know, you imagined it. But he goes, what would that moment do to you if you saw that? How would that make you feel? He goes, that's the feeling we should be trying to get our audiences to. That feeling, real magic.
Great. I'm sure that's what J.K. Rowling tapped into and brought to the masses.
Yeah, in many ways, especially, I mean, yeah, I mean, I loved the books, loved the movies, but especially the books, because everyone got to imagine differently what a true magical world would look and feel like. And the movies, they did it so well. But
yeah, and that ties back to our previous conversation about story too. That she created the real magic in the minds of the world through storytelling.
Exactly, and to that point, that's another thing that Jay Sankey used to talk about. It's incredible how much one person I've never met in the real world, had communication with, but I've never actually met, has completely transformed my life. He used to talk about the fact that in his career, he went through different phases of believing where the magic happened. He said when he was younger, like we just talked about, he believed the magic was in his hands. It was in the cards. It was in the physical props. He said, and then at some point in his career, he switched and thought, no, magic only exists in the minds of the audience. It's only in their mind. And he said, and he thought that was the answer. And then he said, but then he had a third wave, which is where he's landed, which is it exists in your hands, in their mind, and most importantly, in your mind and your belief in yourself as a magician. And how you see yourself. And that's the story, right? That's the story, the internal narrative that never comes out, that we hear great actors, like the most legendary actors. They've got an internal narrative, a backstory for their character, a thought process that never comes out on screen. But that's what makes great actors so good at what they do, and they disappear into roles, is because they're thinking like their character, even if they never say those things out loud. I think Jay was really onto it when he said, yeah, it's your hands, it's in their mind, but it's really fundamentally, it starts and ends in your mind and how you see yourself as a magician. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, that's so profound. So Brian, that book was so influential for you, and it seemed as if it was tying a lot of the pieces together for you. How did that evolve into your understanding of what magic is?
Yeah, so it was Jay, his thoughts, that book, and also my real world mentor, a man I actually knew in the real world whose name is Garrett Thomas. He is a legend among magicians. He's the kind of guy where every magician knows who he is, but no non-magician would ever know who he is. He was on Penn and Teller's Fool Us a couple years ago, so for the first time ever, he got a little bit of public attention. He is David Blaine's creative consultant, so in a large way, he's one of the minds behind David Blaine and behind his creative success. And so for that, he's a real legend in magic. And he was a hero of mine. I had his videos when DVDs first started. The magic community was using DVDs before you were buying DVDs for videos like the average person was doing. Magicians figured out, this is a new technology that I can, if I want to teach magic, I can stop using this crappy VHS and start doing DVDs. Side tangent, but related. DVDs completely changed magic instruction. It was a seismic shift because on a VHS tape, if you wanted to learn magic, you're watching somebody teach you, and you hit pause. Remember what happened when you hit pause on a VHS? That crazy like static thing. And if you tried to rewind, it was totally imperfect.
Well, but that static, that's connecting you to the other dimensions, so that's very important. How do you manage without it?
No doubt. But very, very not useful for learning intricate sleight of hand. Very, very difficult to rewatch a move over and over and over again to see how they did it. And so DVDs gave you instant pause, slow-mo rewind, slow-mo, right? And so as magicians, we could really see what was going on.
Okay, so the DVDs were more nerd practical.
Yes, very nerd practical. So I had these DVDs from Garrett Thomas, that were called Inside the Mind of Garrett Thomas. It was very mysterious, of course, great marketing, and brilliant genius tricks, some of which I literally, to this day, if I had to do a magic show tonight, would be in my show. And he was a hero of mine. So I'm 17 years old. I'm sitting with my buddies in an Applebee's in Buffalo, New York, where I'm from. I think it's the summer before going off to college, and it's like, I don't know, 11:30 at night, half price appetizers. We're doing that whole thing. So I'm sitting there, and I look up, and in walks a man, and my jaw just drops. And my friends are like, what? Who is it? And I'm like, you wouldn't know. And they're like, no, tell me, who is it? I'm like, it's Garrett Thomas. And they're like, who is that? I'm like, I told you wouldn't know. And I'm looking and I'm going, I swear that's Garrett Thomas. But I couldn't tell. I wasn't quite sure. It looked like him, but he was like thinner than I knew the guy. And so I like, maybe it's just a lookalike. And so he gets seated back here behind us where he's behind my back somewhere. And so I'm just sitting there with my friends and they're going, who is this guy? I'm trying to explain to them David Blaine, all this stuff. And then out of nowhere, a hand puts a business card on the table in front of me. I look down, the business card says, Garrett Thomas. I look up as he slides into view with a big smile, puts his hand out and introduces himself. And I was just like, I was just stunned. And my first question.
I'm stunned.
Yeah. My first question was, I said, how did you know I was a magician? And he said the world's most obvious answer. He said, well, you recognized me. Right, of course, right?
Oh, Brian.
And so,
that's so great. And
insane.
I mean, it is simple and obvious. It's also profound. There's that famous quote from Rumi where he says, a thief will always recognize another thief.
Yeah. It was that simple. You recognized me, and I said, what are you doing in? Forget Applebee's. What are you doing in Buffalo? He said, I live in Buffalo. I live like 20 minutes from here. I couldn't believe. I had no idea because again, this was pre-Google. We couldn't look people up. Facebook didn't exist yet. Yeah, so we didn't know. He lived in Buffalo 20 minutes. And so we chat for a while. He does an impromptu 15-minute performance for my friends. Their jaws are, this guy's like one of the 3 best sleight of hand artists in the world. And I mean like in the world, right? And their jaws are on the floor. I'm watching him do tricks that I know how they work. I've studied his DVDs, and I'm still being fooled by tricks I know how they work. I'm missing it still.
Wow.
I'll never forget that as long as I live. And then he said, listen, I shoot pool. I shoot billiards at this like billiards hall every Wednesday night from midnight to 4 a.m. Anytime you want, come hang out, and that's where I'll be.
Incredible.
So I'm driving back from Applebee's and I call my buddy, Adam, who he and I were best friends. We were into magic together. I said, Adam, you're not going to believe who I met at Applebee's. I met Garrett Thomas. He's like, you're screwing with me. I'm like, no, I met Garrett Thomas. He lives 20 minutes from here. He shoots pool. Let's go on Wednesday. So like we had convinced our parents to let us go on a Wednesday night at midnight to a dirty billiards hall in the middle, in downtown Buffalo. So we go there. Sure enough, he's there, again, we didn't even know if he'd be there. He just said that, and that was it. I had no contact with him. He was there, and so for the rest of that summer and intermittently over the next couple of years, I went away to college, but whenever I would come back into town, I studied with Garrett Thomas, so we would shoot pool, and in between rounds, in between shots, he would teach us how to be a magician. Now, this is important.
My goodness.
How to be a magician, not how to do magic tricks. He never taught us a trick ever. He taught us how to be a magician. And so that, over the next couple of years, intermittently coming back on breaks from college, combined with Jay Sankey's work, and Garrett was not a comedy magician. He took magic very seriously. And Jay was absurd and insane and going for the joke at every possible moment, sometimes at the detriment of the magic. Those two things collided while I was a philosophy major in college, and that's where this all happened.
Incredible.
Crazy,
collision.
Right? Yeah.
Sounds like a CERN super collider moment to me.
Yeah. It was, but I didn't know that at the time, right? Isn't that so interesting how that happens to us? I mean, I like it feels, and you and I in earlier conversations have kind of talked about how we tell stories differently after the fact than we live them. I didn't live this as a collision moment. I lived it as a, wow, how cool is this? And that's it. Like, hey, I get to hang out with this guy, Garrett Thomas, like who's a hero of mine. And this guy, Jay Sankey, I love his stuff. And in the middle of all that, I was trying to date and getting my heart broken and having friends come and go and trying to pass my classes and desperately trying to grow chest hair. I'm still working on it. Yeah. And yeah, no, I mean, so I just, but looking back, it was seismic. Like that's why when I talk about luck to our earlier conversation, I really mean it. Like, what were the odds in all the world I was in that Applebee's at that moment?
Oh, Brian, that sounds like your first chance encounter.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's one I actually think this is the first time I've ever told that story publicly. I think, actually, in my entire life. I've told that story to many people, like, but I've never really told that. Yeah. Because it's, it really is. It was a chance encounter that you can't account for. And it wasn't like I deserved it. I was like a 17-year-old kid who loved magic. I hadn't earned it. It really did like just get put in my lap, but I took but we went that first Wednesday. We went
you earned
to
it afterwards.
So and yeah.
I would venture to say, sorry to interrupt. I would venture to say that serendipity gave it to you, and then you went on to earn it.
Yeah, I hope so. You know, I've when I've told this story to people in private, especially when I tell other magicians, I always have to say, and I mean this, I always saw him as a mentor. I'm not sure he ever saw me as a student. I have no idea if he's proud of me, if he's proud of the magician I became. For many years, I think he wasn't, because I really went the Jay Sankey comedy absurd route, and I think he didn't like that very much. So I don't even know if he's proud of me or if he cares at all. I mean, I don't even know if he's ever thought of me since the last time I saw him in person, which was probably 10 years ago or something like that. But it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. Like he profoundly transformed my life. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And is that one of the most magical moments of your life?
Yeah, I mean, apart from the obvious ones that are kind of too obvious to state, you know, my son being born, getting married, you know, meeting my, you know, Lindsay, who's now my wife, you know, and we could talk at length about those, but they're not unlike every other story you've heard. They're important to me, but they're not unlike every story of a birth or a wedding that you've heard. Outside of those moments, and I'll tell you specifically, the most important thing Garrett did for me was he asked me a question that I almost made me quit magic. And he asked me, what is magic? And I wasn't, and I was like, well, what do you mean? You know, magic's, obviously magic is, what? And I had nothing. I had nothing.
Brain freeze.
Right? Yeah, I had nothing. I was totally frozen. But that wasn't the question that made me almost quit magic. That was the preliminary question. The follow-up question, and I feel like he was smirking as he asked it too, because I feel like I was not the first kid he'd ever done this to. I feel like he does this to everybody. The follow-up question, he said, how could you possibly hope to create magic for your audience if you don't even know what it is? And it broke me. I mean, and I didn't know what to do. I felt like an idiot. I felt like I didn't deserve to be a magician. And you could see that as cruel. And I think there were students of his that did actually quit magic because of questions like that. He has a reputation for being like that. Yeah.
Sounds to me like a master throwing down a gauntlet.
Right. And I think that was his way of separating, of throwing a line down and saying, hey, the 5% or the 1% who really deserve to be in this art form. Or maybe it was a kindness. Maybe it was saying this art form is incredibly difficult. The odds of you succeeding in it are so low. You may as well make sure this is really where your heart is. And you know, I think that's the positive reading of that. And I said, I don't know how to answer that. And he said, well, here's what you can do if you want to. He said, go home and write an essay, write 20 pages, write 50 pages, write a book, write as long as you need to answer that question. And then a week or two later, come back and see if you can make it shorter. What can you cut out? And then try to make it shorter. See if you can get it down to 3 pages, and then down to 1 page, and then down to 1 paragraph, and see if at some point in your magical career you can get it down to 1 sentence. I'm going to tell you, this was the first experience in clarity work I had done in my entire life, and it would take me probably another 10, 12 years before I ever realized that this was a part of my training for all the work that I do now, what I do for a living now. He said, see if you can figure out in one sentence. And by the end of college, I had my one sentence, and I published it in an ebook that I wrote about theory of magic at one point. But I figured out my one sentence. I know how to answer the question, what is magic? And so once I knew what magic was, then I could create a show. Then it made sense, because before I had that, I never knew what tricks to put in the show, what jokes should be in there, how long should the show be, how much interaction. These are the questions that magicians struggle to answer, and most never answer really well. They just kind of keep throwing random tricks and hoping people like it. But once I knew what magic was, then it's really obvious. There's most tricks don't fit my answer, what is magic? So I have to only choose from this tiny handful of tricks that actually work for my answer, and it became that is the question and the answer that really.
Okay, we will get to your answer, Brian. But first, I want to say that it is interesting that it wasn't about the answer; it was about your answer.
Yes, and he was very clear about that.
And because you took the time to distill your answer over time, which is an organic process, which we can't rush, which is, I believe, deeply linked to our own hero's journey. Then you got, as you said, the clarity of your answer, what is magic for you, which then went on to allow you to basically curate magic in concert with your own perception of it and your own path and purpose.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And he was so clear about that from the beginning, that this is your answer. I remember him saying, your answer is going to be different than my answer. I remember him saying, it has to be different because you've lived a different life than I have. You know, there's no way two magicians could ever really answer that question the exact same way. We've had too many different experiences, and your life experiences, the way you see the world is going to shape how you answer the question. It's going to shape what you view as magical. To your earlier question, kind of the overarching question of like, what's the most or some of the most magical experiences of your life? One of the most magical experiences of my life, the one that actually came to mind immediately when you asked that, was not a magician. It wasn't a magician. It wasn't anything like that. It was a concert by The Who, which is my all-time favorite band. And I've seen The Who many, many times, many more than anyone from my generation should have been able to see them. Very lucky. You know, all those classic rock bands are getting old. They're getting pretty old. And I got to see The Who many times because my dad is a massive Who fan. And so one time I saw The Who, I was, I want to say 8 years old. It was 96, yeah. I was 8 years old, and they were touring Quadrophenia, their second rock opera, so it's very famous in music. And there's a song, that the closing song of Quadrophenia is Love Reign Over Me, and it's just become this iconic song. Almost everybody knows it, even if you don't know The Who. And they were closing out the 2-hour rock opera, and they hit the climax of Love Reign Over Me when Roger Daltrey just belts that insane love. You know, it just comes out, and the whole band swells back in, and they were on tour with an orchestra at that time. So it's one of the heaviest rock bands in history with an orchestra on stage.
Wow.
And Daltrey hits that note, and 20,000 people became one person.
Oh.
And I've never done drugs in my life, literally never taken a hit of pot. And I don't say that because it's better or worse. The point is, if that's what drugs feel like, fantastic. Because like 20,000 people became one person. And to this day, that is one of the most magical experiences of my life. And it had nothing to do with tricks or deception or anything like that. So I think of magic, I think of that.
So that does sound like the ultimate one-to-many magic.
Yeah.
And it was done without any of the conventional avenues of magic. It was drawing upon universal magic, maybe universal principles of magic that music and poetry and connection inspired.
It was story and connection, yeah. And I wouldn't have had those words back then to describe what that was. I just felt it. But now you look back, you go, it's this incredible. It's story and connection, right? It's feeling something bigger than yourself and feeling connected with other people that are strangers because you all believe in the same thing, at least in this moment, you know. And it was beautiful. Yeah.
Believe, and also you're literally in the experience of some universal, profound, shared reality.
Yeah, the shared experience, and I think about that I thought about that all throughout my magic career, because I always, actually, it's one of the things that eventually led me out of magic, is I felt increasingly like I was just never achieving that ideal. I just kept thinking, God, I'm a magician. My job is to produce that kind of experience, and I feel like I've never produced an experience anywhere near as profound as that for my audiences, and they're not even magicians. That's a band, like, you know. And I started realizing I rarely felt like that when I watched magic shows. And I started going, God, there's something weird about the fact that magicians who supposedly specialize in that experience so rarely deliver it, whereas people do tend to get that experience from the climax of a great movie or their favorite band, you know, in a live performance, or a great piece of poetry or something like that.
Or psychedelics.
Or psychedelics, sure. You know, but magicians, apparently this is what we specialize in. And I forget who said it. There was a great magician who once said, the experience of surprise is incredibly rare in magic. And you think, well, that shouldn't be. But you watch magic performances, you think, well, that's right. Very rarely do you not see the end of the trick coming. In many ways, you know what's about to happen, and the fact that it happened is amazing. But shouldn't surprise and wonder be in magic more often? You know. So yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot of different thoughts about that. You can tell I haven't actually gotten these.
I just had to get my snake for a second.
You gotta go. I love that it's attached to there it is.
it was.
It's attached to the chips. That's great. That's great. No, that's so funny. I haven't verbalized any of this stuff in a long time, and I think the last time I did, or most of the times I ever have, were among the crinkle.
I'm audio bombing you.
It's great. Most of the times I've ever discussed this were among magicians. You know, I think I've never had any idea if any of this would be interesting to non-magicians. I feel like it's the stuff we talk about behind closed doors. Yeah.
These are backroom nerd magic conversations. I'm honored.
Very nerdy.
I am honored. I just had to get my snake out, and here it came. Fabulous. Brian, that's incredible. And what would you say are the universal principles behind that moment, if you could wager a guess as to that?
The universal principles behind that experience at the concert, that kind of shared experience. Yeah, I mean, I think we kind of touched on them, but for me, it's really the connection. Connection is about understanding, not agreement. And this is something I talk about all the time these days. But I think there's a big misconception that if you want to connect with someone, you have to agree with them. It helps, or it can help, but it's not necessary. That connection is the ability to kind of say, I'm here, but I can see why you're there, right? And maybe there's something incredible in between us that we can create together, where we can both leave uplifted, right? And to me, that's what that moment at the concert is. There's no way I agreed with every person in the crowd. 20,000 people. We wouldn't have all agreed with each other. There are probably a billion topics we could have disagreed on, person to your left and right. But in that moment, in that context, there was something that we all experienced together, that we all understood each other, that we could say that not in spite of our disagreements, but maybe because of them, isn't this beautiful, right? Because we disagree on so many things, this is especially beautiful. that we can actually share something that reminds us that like all like it's like if you could abstract yourself and go up 20,000 feet and look down. It's like astronauts talk about. You know, they talk about you see the Earth from up there and all your problems that you worry about on a day-to-day just disappear immediately. Every astronaut has talked about that because you can just see that, God, it's just one thing. We're just sharing this tiny little rock and doing our best. I feel like that's what those moments do for people, is they just remind you that, man, like we're all doing our best. And most of the stuff we're disagreeing about, most, not all, but most of the stuff we're disagreeing about is not that important.
Yeah. So again, I just hear a lot of these deep threads of your life, which is, you know, that you found the magic of connection even at age 8. And also you understand it now as a sort of a echo around perception. That there is a universal perception that can be harnessed. Brian, what I find really interesting is in terms of the hero's journey, how this magical guide seemed to turn up at a key moment in your youth. And he played both the guide, he also played the threshold guardian, where he sort of, you know, challenged you to turn back. And then when you didn't turn back, he sort of became your magical helper. And truly magical helper, pun intended.
Very magical.
So take me forward from there in your journey in magic.
My journey in magic through college while I was working all this stuff out was very much flailing forward. I don't think I ever did 2 shows in college that were identifiable as like the same character, you know, quote unquote. I think every single chance I got to do an event, whether it was an open mic, just testing out material, or paid, because I was working magic gigs all through college. I was doing my papers in nights and weekends in hotels, driving all over upstate New York. And so whether it was a paid gig or a volunteer performance, I feel like I just tried something completely new every time. And I think it's not the advice I would give, but it's definitely one way forward. Like I think I would probably give someone today the advice of find a character, answer that question, what is magic, figure out kind of what your lens is, and then spend 3 months doing nothing but that, and then see what's not working. And if it's not working, if you don't like it, shift gears, because at least then you're testing one variable at a time, kind of a thing. You can kind of go, okay, this shtick isn't working. What I was doing was new tricks, new jokes, new approach, go fast, go slow, be funny, be serious. I was trying something new every show. And you never know if what's working or not when you do that, because you're testing too many variables at once, because you could have just got an audience that wasn't into that particular type of humor you tried that night, but maybe the next 25 audiences would have been into that. But if you switch it next show, you'll never know that. So I wouldn't recommend it, but that's what I did, because I was just reading books and watching DVDs and listening to mentors and trying stuff. Like, and there was a beauty in the pre-YouTube world that we did. I can't imagine being a kid getting into the arts today. On one hand, it's amazing because you have access to everything, right? With the thing in your pocket, the square in your pocket, you know, you get access to everything. But by the same token, I can't imagine how the comparison culture problem. If you're a 17-year-old and you're, you know, or a 12-year-old and you're getting into magic or getting into guitar, and you look up like beginner guitar lessons and you see 6-year-olds that are playing better than Eddie Van Halen ever did, you just go, well, Jesus, what hope do I have, right? I think I was the last generation that had the gift of ignorance. I didn't know how bad I was because I had nothing to compare it to. There were no other magicians in Oneonta, New York, my college town, you know, where they were, you know, 27 bars in a college, you know, like there were no other magicians. And so I didn't know if I was a good or bad magician. I just knew if the audience liked it that night or didn't. And so there was a grace to ignorance, and I think it was wonderful. And so that was college for me, was flailing forward in comedy magic and trying to find something that worked.
In a very unscientific way, you were
very unscientific.
You were not testing, but you were proceeding.
Yeah, my present day self would never have approved of that level of chaos. But chaos and creativity often go hand in hand, and so I think there's there may not have been a method to the madness, but the madness was sufficient, I think.
Yes, and I assume the madness was intuitive enough that you were probably kind of following your own guidance about what worked and didn't work, and even finding an alignment with your own definition of magic as you were experimenting.
Yeah, and that's to our earlier part of today's conversation, where we talked about the difference between comedy and how Garrett was very serious about magic and Jay was not. I think Jay really viewed himself as an entertainer first, a magician second. And Garrett was a magician first and only. And he was a pure, he what we would call a purist in magic. And that's a whole category of magicians. And I, to this day, if I say entertainer first, if I'm a magician, I'm absolutely entertainer first. Because what audiences want, I really believe, they don't want to be fooled. They want to escape. And there's a lot of ways to escape, right? There's a lot of ways to get out. And if I can make my audience laugh and we can have a great time and they can see some cool magic, and at the end of the show, they don't think I was the greatest magician of all time, but they go, God, I needed that tonight. Right? And I used to get that all the time. I used to get people, I had a woman come up to me once just sobbing after the show, and I thought, God, is she laughing so hard she's crying? But no, she was sobbing. And I'm thinking, God, it was a comedy show. What the hell happened? And she said, my husband passed away 2 weeks ago unexpectedly. We've been married for 30 years, but he wasn't sick, nothing, whatever. And she said, for 2 weeks I've just been in my house depressed, and I saw that the college was putting on a show open to the community, and I came out and I laughed so hard. I needed this so badly. And she just shook my hand with two hands and thanked me and hugged me and left. And I just thought, see, that's why I didn't take the magic seriously, is exactly for that reason. Because what she didn't need was a serious magic show. What she needed was an escape. And I think that's what most people need. To me, that harkens back to Steve Martin, because what he described, what he pioneered, was that he wanted to go for a laugh that made no sense. He wanted to go for a laugh that was outside the box, that triggered something in people that they couldn't even put words to, that they couldn't do word of mouth marketing for, but that moved them in a way that was magic. Yeah. That's exactly right. And and as you know, he was my earliest hero, and he had a huge impact on my magic, not from his magic, but from his approach to performing. And I spent so many of my early years as a magician trying to do what would the Steve Martin absurdist comedy version of a magic show look like. I was kind of trying to do an anti-magic show for a few years. Eventually, I did give up on that, and
Brian, you're not going to believe it. I wrote in my notes today, anti-magic.
There you go. I was trying really hard to do an anti-magic show, ultimately realizing the same thing every other magician who's ever tried to do that before me, and I'm not the only one who's ever tried to do that, realizes at some point, which is the audience doesn't know enough about magic as an art form to enjoy a parody of magic. Here, you have to know deeply the subject matter to do a meta-analysis and enjoy it, right? And so doing a magic show that makes fun or kind of pokes fun lightly at the art and history of magic is funny to magicians. It's funny to magic enthusiasts. It's very bizarre. Nobody, to an average person who's looking for a magic show, it's not good enough magic to be magical, and it's not funny enough to be funny because they don't have the reference point for the comedy. So it just didn't work ultimately, and I ultimately decided.
I have to say, it sounds very appealing to an existentialist.
Yes, I'm sure it would be. Yeah. No, I love the idea of it.
Over here.
I can hear it. It makes my soul hurt. I I really loved the idea of it, and I really tried hard for a good year or two professionally doing paid gigs in my after college. My first year or two signed to an agency trying to do that show and getting bad reviews over and over and over again from paying clients. And my management, my agency, they were kind of like, we need better reviews if we're going to keep booking you. You can't get bad reviews. So I shifted and thought, well, let me just try to do the funniest magic show that's actually a magic show that I can do. A little bit more traditional, but then I went that route and and enjoyed it. And I had a good time doing it. Yeah.
So you had to turn back from your avant-garde, meta, anti-magic explorations.
Yeah. And there are today magicians who are making that work, but it works in 2022 because magic is so much more popular now in terms of there's YouTube, there's Penn and Teller's Fool Us. The average person actually knows quite a bit about magic. They know magicians. They've watched on America's Got Talent every year and Fool Us and, all these shows. Justin Willman had a show on Netflix for a bunch of years, Magic for Humans, that was so popular. So the average person is much more magic literate today. So you could I could probably do that show today much better than I could 12, 15 years ago, whatever it was. Yeah.
Well, Brian, why don't you let us in on the secret, what the formula that you wrote for your personal definition of magic was, and let's explore that for the remaining moments that we have left together today.
Yeah. So my definition of magic is the moment of conscious conflict between knowledge and evidence. And that is a very academic definition. You can feel I wrote that when I was a philosophy student. So let's unpack that. It's the moment of conscious conflict between knowledge and evidence. So first of all, what that speaks to for me is that magic is fundamentally about an internal conflict. It's about a moment when your brain has to fight with itself, has to argue with itself. Which is not a pleasant experience. And many magicians, really smart magicians, have talked about this and written about this. Magic is a very difficult art form. It's not a nice art form. It's not like going to a movie or a Broadway show where you kind of just sit back and let it wash over you. Sometimes they challenge your beliefs, but you mostly just kind of chill.
It's not a safe space, is what you're saying.
No, it's not. It's not a safe space. Like intellectually, essentially, like it's very challenging because fundamentally what magic is doing is presenting you with something that cannot happen. It can't be. It not only isn't possible, it can't be possible. And so it's a conscious conflict. And now I say conscious conflict because this is not a mere conflict. Like we have conflicts in our life all the time. We have internal battles between good and bad. What do I do here? Whatever. A lot of them we're not aware of. This is where a lot of problems come out for people that we need to resolve in therapists' offices and things like that. And I say that seriously, right, as someone who believes in mental health, and my wife is a therapist. But this is a conscious conflict. You're aware of the problem as you're having it. It's a very special type of intellectual conflict, right? You're totally aware. And what
you're
is
feeling the pain consciously.
Yes. Yeah,
in the moment.
It's very painful. It's why people don't know how to react to magic. It's why you see people knocking chairs over and cursing and all this stuff. Some people laugh. A lot of people, their reaction to magic is to laugh. There's nothing, it's not because it's funny, but it's because there's no natural reaction to magic, and laughter is the closest reaction that makes sense biologically, because a lot of comedy is built on a twist, right? An incongruity. And so a lot of people laugh at magic because of the incongruity. But it's worse than that. I can tell you, I don't know if you've seen this or if you've ever felt this, but as a magician when you tell someone you're a magician, you hear all kinds of different things. You say, I'm a magician. Some people are like, oh my God, I love magic. We love those people. There's not a lot of them. Most people are like, man, like their immediate reaction is like they tense up right away. And they're like, I don't know how you guys do. And then they immediately want to tell you about some terrible experience they had with a magician 6 years ago, right? This is what happens a lot.
They want to share their magic trauma.
Their magic trauma, yeah, very much so, very much so. And so it's a conscious conflict, and it's between knowledge and evidence. It's between what you know isn't possible and what all of your available evidence tells you is happening anyway. And that's the problem, is that, like I said, it's not just that it isn't possible, it's that it can't be possible. And you know it can't be possible, but you're totally witnessing, feeling, experiencing it happen anyway. And it just breaks people. Yeah.
It reminds me of, from my background in yoga, that the mystics in yoga, they are always looking for cracks. We could say existential cracks in between things. And that's because cracks are transpersonal. So, from morning to night, from night to morning, the space in between things, the space in between your eyes, your navel, all kinds of places that are in between, and in which two things can't exist at the same time. And that's because in those moments, there's an opportunity to transcend ordinary reality and enter into something that is magical. Yeah. So I love how you basically found that in your mathematical formula of what magic is, that it is basically born out of or found in the space between, and even inspired by the conflict about the knowledge and experience.
Yes. And one of the best ways I've ever heard it described, and boy, oh boy, it's been so long since I've cited this quote. It was either Teller of Penn and Teller, or it was Jamie Ian Swiss, who's very famous among magicians, but not in the public. It's one of them, and I don't remember, and I hate not knowing my sources. But it was this. It was, we often hear about the suspension of disbelief. We talk about this in movies, right? You need a suspension of disbelief. If you didn't have that, you'd be like, well, that's a green screen. They're not really flying. And then you couldn't enjoy anything, right? We need a suspension of disbelief for a Broadway, for a musical, for movies, for lots of things. People talk about magic as if it's a suspension of disbelief. And it is, but it's an unwilling suspension of disbelief. All those other ones are willing. You choose to suspend your disbelief to watch a movie. Magic forces you to suspend your disbelief. And I think that's a lot of where that pain and that I wouldn't use the word trauma, but you get a little too heavy, but that pain of magic, though, that is that it's like the suspension of disbelief is being forced upon you. And that's very weird intellectually. There's nothing else that does that. I'll bring this full circle for us. Garrett Thomas, one of the things that he told me all the way back when I was 17, 18 years old, is he said, magic is the only art form that produces wonder on demand. That lots of other things in the world you can experience wonder. You see wonder when you see a rainbow, wonder when at a movie, wonder at whatever. But but you don't know when a rainbow is coming. The filmmaker doesn't know when you're going to experience it, if at all. Magicians, we do it on demand. I can tell you the moment you're going to experience wonder. I can guarantee you're going to experience it at a certain moment. That's the only art form that does that, and it's just like, that blew my mind when he told me that.
Yeah. So magicians manufacture wonder on demand.
Yeah.
And they do so through this conscious conflict.
Yeah, for me anyway. That's what it is for me. And I've talked to many magicians who have very different definitions of magic, but that is what it felt like for me, which for me, like I said, really restricted what types of tricks made sense in my show. I really had to choose very carefully, and that's how I gravitated towards kind of the lovable con artist persona, because I got to do a magic show that was very much about magic. At the same time it was a magic show, I would teach the audience, give them a little bit of the history. I would show them a little bit about how a trick works, but then fool them with the same trick I just showed them. Kind of a Penn and Teller feel. I loved doing that, and to me that really spoke. I loved being able to tell the audience a little bit about how a trick works, and then fool them with it anyway. That felt like that conscious conflict. At really the heart of that conflict is being,
that's a magician's FU move right there.
Seriously. And one of my favorite things is I would show somebody how a trick worked, then I would do it, and then they would argue with me and say, that can't be how you did it, because I would have seen it. And I'd in my head be going, it is how I did it. I did it exactly the way I just showed you. And they'd be fighting with me that I was lying to them. And that just, as a magician, that just made my heart happy.
That is so absurd, Brian. Oh my goodness. As a philosopher, that also must have made you very happy.
Yeah, it was game over when they would fight with, when they were so convinced that couldn't have been, I must have lied about how it was done. I go, well, God, if I can tell people how the trick works and they don't believe me, I win. So.
Yes, and that reminds me of the key line from our last conversation, which is whoever tells the best story wins.
Yes.
So it must be that you con them into this very complex story and you won. And they got some wonder manufactured for them through the magic.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Well, Brian, please let's continue these conversations. There's so much more to discuss. And I will continue, poking into the wonder zone that is you. I don't know where to go from here.
I don't think I'm gonna put the wonder zone on my next business card, but I'll take it. Sounds like a nickname that a 5-year-old gave himself.
How about the wonder zone that is you?
Yeah. That is going to be the subtitle of my next self-help book. Yeah. Magical experiences, the wonder zone that is you.
And I think it would work well for your human connection work. But Brian,
it worked for somebody.
Brian, before you go, I do need to provide a levitating purple kiss to you.
Aha. Beautiful. Beautiful. I love it. Excellent.
Oh, wait. Let me do that again.
I thought you were going to say the power of Christ compels you for a second, and I was just like, what's happening?
Okay, let me bring that in. Okay, let's see. So Brian, before you go, I do need to levitate a purple kiss for you. And let me see. The power of Christ compels you.
Thanks for coming to the Wonder Zone. I should call my studio that.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
All right. Have a great one, Brian.